On the medical side, I always think of an example in the early days of hepatitis C with the pegylated interference, where there were in essence two options. And one was, in hindsight, a very over-engineered solution where patients had to dial in their weight before self-administering. And the second one was a one-size-fits-all. The first one, of course, created challenges for patients. How often should I weigh myself? I'm looking at lean body mass versus total body mass to get the right dose. Whereas the one-size-fits-all watch was much easier to use. And the first one, despite being market leader, was quickly overtaken by the one-size-fits-all that actually led to equivalent outcomes in terms of effectiveness, because patients would adhere to that medication more than they did to the more complex one. So those are some areas where I think of where things there, like the end user, the patient wasn't really involved in design and what would be suitable. And that tech-first approach, I think, backfired. And that's, for me, why I always think you really need to define the problem and the situation and how that innovation can help solve that.
Absolutely. And I love the way you framed that, making it clear that, the best, most revolutionary technology isn't necessarily the thing that solves the problem. It's that whole system with the user and the environment that it's in. We're thinking about data quality and hygiene and how sure we have to be of that data before it leads to a clinical decision. Very different to it leading to an operational or a process decision or a leadership indicator that takes us to the next decision that we can then make with better data. And the rule somebody gave me recently, which I love to apply when it comes to AI, is that when we're looking for a probable good idea or a probable answer, we can leverage AI because it's a probabilistic tool. When instead we're looking for precision and the decisions are critical, we want to lean into our governance processes, which is more of that leadership process. So the two can come together, but we need to use both to overcome that.
Falling down with the problem, not the solution, right? And we are, the technology is incredible and it's going to transform society, but we want to solve the right problem, because what ends up happening if you don't do that, and I have experienced this firsthand in a variety of different institutions, that if we don't have the right incentives aligned and the right problem we are solving, you actually end up spending a lot of resources and pursuing technologies that are not fit for purpose for the applications. And just give me a couple examples, right? Medical information in medical affairs. It's a great, easy use case, but you don't want to automate it completely. You want to have the human just supplement AI to help them identify information. But the emerging topic that I've become very fascinated with is just evaluations, right? So building evals, that you own your own eval, that you are okay with a certain threshold of risk. Like you talked about, there's a probability involved. As long as humans are the helm of what the output is, those, I think, creating a really good evaluation system for each of these parts of the workflow is incredibly important. So, but yeah.
One can do a significant impact, I believe, by focusing on three key areas: process, partnership, and proof. When we start with the non-patient impacting process, like deploying an ML for predictive maintenance on our complex manufacturing lines, whether we do continuous manufacturing or a discrete like batch manufacturing, we can always deploy predictive maintenance utilizing all the data. We can also implement quality and yield optimization using like thousands of sensor data. We all, like any manufacturing facility, has thousands of IoT devices, and these are sometimes necessary by the regulatory frameworks like FDA or EMA. Instead of just showing the data to regulatory bodies and proving that yes, our product is safe, we can also utilize the same data to find optimal parameters and maximize the batch yield and purity, right? That's one way to do it.
Let's get started. Hello, everyone. And I want to introduce the moderator of the next panel, Melissa Norcross, whom I've known for quite a few years. She's an accomplished strategy executive, having held leadership positions at organizations ranging from Fortune 100 to high-growth technology companies. Her career spans 3 continents and multiple industries, tech, pharma, and finance as well. She's currently VP of Corporate Strategy at Hyland Software. Her background is in engineering. She spent most of her career working in strategy and consulting alongside extraordinarily smart and kind people. She's previously served as Chief Strategy Officer for a financial software company as well, Strategy and Planning Executive for USAA, and consultant for multinational strategy firms, including McKinsey and Company. Her areas of expertise include strategy, process improvement, organizational transformation, and leadership. And in fact, I can proudly say that I received my MIT certification in leading organizational change in 2018 from a course that she taught of about 100 CEOs from all over the world. And that's what started our really friendship and our relationship. So, Melissa, I want to hand over the stage to you to introduce the panel.
Great. Well, it's nice to see all of you. We have an incredible panel of folks here today. And we're going to be talking about leadership in the age of AI and innovation leadership in particular. Leaders play a really critical role in driving innovation. And yet in the age of AI and an ever-changing world of technology, customer expectations and competitive landscapes is getting and navigating all of those and the changes associated with them is getting a lot more difficult. So we're here to discuss how we as leaders can best tackle those challenges. And what we're going to do is I'll introduce each of the folks in turn and then pose a first question to them. So Dr. Power, who is the CEO of Empower Medical, is here with us today. He is part of Empower Medical, which is a medical affairs consultancy that empowers pharmaceutical medical professionals and solution providers to achieve their best and highest potential. He's got more than 25 years of experience in the pharma industry, and he's a recognized expert in medical affairs strategy, organizational design, storytelling, and innovation. And he's been invited to chair and speak extensively at pharmaceutical congresses. He's an advisory board member for several different organizations and was formerly the VP of North American Medical Affairs for the hospital businesses at Pfizer. He's held positions of increasing responsibility during his career in the pharma industry, beginning with his role at Pfizer, leading the U.S. teams in vaccines and infectious diseases. He's a global fellow in the medicines development and board director for the Faculty of Global Medicines Development Professional Academy. That's a mouthful. He's also a scientific advisory board member and visiting faculty at King's College London and their Center for Pharmaceuticals Medicine Research. He, prior to that, held a faculty position at the United Medical and Dental Schools, Guy's and St. Thomas Hospitals in London, and holds a PhD from the Welsh School of Pharmacy, University of Wales, UK, and an MBA from Henley Management College in the UK. Obviously, a very broad and deep experience base. Now, you've emphasized, Eddie, that innovation isn't about chasing new technology, but instead getting the problem right. What have you experienced that makes you believe that that's the key? And maybe could you give us an example of where leaders have misframed the problem and what happened as a result?
Absolutely, Ms. Well, thank you for the introduction, and great to be part of such an esteemed and talented panel. But yes, I mean, when you look at problems and technology, sometimes we don't look at the underlying reasons behind the problem and how that might be solved with or without technology. And I can think of a non-medical example is the Segway. That was pitched as being a revolutionary transport method, but it didn't really take into account what the actual problem was. It didn't take into account the system in which a Segway would work, the challenges of navigating side paths, walkways, like local regulations in terms of transport. And on the medical side, I always think of an example in the early days of hepatitis C with the pegylated interference, where there were in essence 2 options. And one was, in hindsight, a very over-engineered solution where patients had to dial in their weight before self-administering, and the second one was a one-size-fits-all. The first one, of course, created challenges for patients. How often should I weigh myself? I'm looking at lean body mass versus total body mass to get the right dose. Whereas the one-size-fits-all watch was much easier to use. And the first one, despite being market leader, was quickly overtaken by the one-size-fits-all that actually led to equivalent outcomes in terms of effectiveness, because patients would adhere to that medication more than they did to the more complex one. So those are some areas where I think of where things there, like the end user, the patient, wasn't really involved in design and what would be suitable. And that tech first approach, I think, backfired. And that's, for me, why I always think you really need to define the problem and the situation and how that innovation can help solve that.
Absolutely. And I love the way you framed that, making it clear that, the best, most revolutionary technology isn't necessarily the thing that solves the problem. It's that whole system with the user and the environment that it's in. And Vivek, I want to come to you. Now, Vivek is an extraordinary engineer and scientist. Vivek Mukhatyar is a biomedical engineer. He's got 15 years of experience in medical affairs, regulatory strategy, and a pipeline product development across medical devices and pharmaceuticals. He's got a PhD in biomedical engineering from Georgia Tech, a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering from Boston University, and a certificate in strategy and innovation from MIT Sloan School. He's the current medical AI team lead within medical affairs at Pfizer. But before joining Pfizer, he was the global medical director for plastics and regenerative medicine and medical affairs at AbbVie. So you can see his career includes roles as a medical science liaison, lifestyle allergen, and a regulatory affairs specialist. And his work spans from plastics to general surgery and orthopedics, nerve regeneration, spinal cord repair, and cancer research. So that technology space is an important space that you've been in. And Ravi, that's why I want to lean in, because Eddie just told us, beware of leaning too much on technology. And I think right now we're living in a reality with AI, and you are being really involved in AI. You're passionate about the power of framing the problem really well. How have you seen the impact of problem framing play out as primarily a technologist and an engineer? And how do leaders distinguish between problems that AI is good for solving and problems where human judgment is still essential?
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And again, it's been an incredible honor to be part of this exciting panel, as well as with all of you guys who are leaders in this space. So yeah, I think based on my background, as you can tell, that I'm very passionate about medical affairs and getting the right information to the clinician so that they can make the best decisions for their patients. That has always been my North Star. To that end, where does technology play, and how do we identify the right problems to pursue? Within medical affairs, we know what the constraints are, right? So that's where I would recommend leaders to start. What are your current constraints? We often are constraints for resources. We often are constrained within regulatory environments. We are often constrained from geographical regulations that are different from country to country. So there's just need to name a few. And that's where human oversight becomes paramount in terms of us, collaborating with technology to come up with solutions. So models are very good at making decisions. So if I had to tell which using technology and AI as an augmenting your ability to make decisions, this is an intelligence untapped. So you could utilize it for that. But when it comes to actually using the technology to inform clinical decisions, that's when you really want it to have a human partner and human make the ultimate decision, because there's a lot of challenges around accountability on when we're not there yet in terms of allowing AI to make all the decisions. And this is the quote that has become, I don't know who said this, but it's become kind of my second nature to me, is now falling in love with the problem, not the solution, right? And we are, the technology is incredible and it's going to transform society, but we want to solve the right problems, because what ends up happening if you don't do that, and I have experienced this firsthand in a variety of different institutions, that if we don't have the right incentives aligned and the right problem we are solving, you actually end up spending a lot of resources in pursuing technologies that are not fit for purpose for the applications. And just give me a couple examples, right? Medical information in medical affairs, it's a great, easy use case, but you don't want to automate it completely. You want to have the human just supplement AI to help them identify information. So there's just early stage.
Yeah, I think, and I love how you point out that, AI is, intelligence on tap and technology on tap. But it makes me think of the old joke about, intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. And we as leaders have to have that wisdom as we come into play. And I think that works really well with what Eddie shared. Ravi has also joined us. Now, Ravi Kiran Koppichetti is a very accomplished data engineer with experience in designing, building, and maintaining a lot of complex data infrastructures across industries, from manufacturing, healthcare, retail, and technology. He knows a lot about distributed systems, data modeling, and data architectures, but he brings a lot of knowledge and a lot of excellence in collaborating with cross-functional teams and stakeholders from that database perspective. He's got a lot of experience leading digital transformation initiatives, enhance operational excellence and drive strategic innovation within and across organizations. So his professional journey, I think, really shows both his passion and commitment to excellence, as well as database technologies and how they help us address these complex challenges, which, as Vivek said, helps you fall in love with the problem and is passionate about solving those problems. Now, Ravi, I know you think about the constraints in the systems and hurdles and how you overcome that with technology and how you leverage it in order to do that. Could you share a little bit about what you think is relevant about this methodology that you use, and how, with the right mindset, you can overcome a lot of those challenges?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. And thank you for the wonderful opportunity and the introduction to be part of the esteemed panel. First of all, I totally agree with what Eddie and Vivek said. I think my responses to this question will kind of complement their thoughts on a similar matter. I think the leaders should enforce, certain frameworks. There's a methodology called the Kata methodology and the 5 Why framework. Leaders, I think they should start implementing these kind of frameworks and start questioning the current processes. This will help them frame the problems better, and while emphasizing deep curiosity and also restrain them from jumping to solutions directly, right? Instead of I think leaders should also define and document the target conditions, like along with the desired outcome. I think it's also important for the leaders to define, when a project is supposed to be done, like what defines as done.
Thanks. I love how we all are centering on the fact that problems are the thing we're here to solve. And we do want to fall in love with the problems, not the first solutions that we come up with. So that is a great thing. But I also want to make sure that we really grapple with why that's hard. Defining the problem requires both deep curiosity and restraint, and not rushing to a solution. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the practical steps that you take as leaders to frame these problems better, and how we can all do that in our innovation. Eddie, I know you've worked on some challenges in which system thinking and thinking through that whole system from beginning to end was critical. What do you think are the pitfalls that leaders fall into when they focus too narrowly, and how do systems thinking help them overcome that?
Yes, I think sometimes we get too focused on our own little part of what we're an expert in, and in pharma it could be your own medicine, your own device, your drug device combination, and we don't often think of how that might be implemented in a system. And for me, one of the learnings, particularly with COVID, when I was in the hospital business, we were using a lot of IV drugs, obviously, for those patients who were hospitalized. But if you recall, hospitals implemented these barrier type patient management approaches where a lot of the machines were kept outside the rooms. And now suddenly with your injectable drugs, you had 30 feet of tubing for the drug to get through rather than 3 or 4 feet. And in terms of the system, the pharmacists were struggling with, how do I program the pump? Am I getting enough flow rate into the patient? So for me, it's part of framing that problem with trying to see where there may be weaknesses or challenges up front in the system, and then be ready for that. The other example for me is always very practical, like the childproof caps on tablets. The problem is if you're an older patient with arthritis, it's actually very, very difficult, to open those caps. So sure, you've got your safety approach first to make them childproof, but then you've got your applied approach where your end customer, if you like, cannot access, that particular medicine. So having that whole understanding of systems and how different levers work for or against each other, I think sets you up more for success and identifying where solutions might come in.
Yeah, that's great. Now, just as a reminder, I want to make sure that you are all comfortable dropping questions in the chat. This panel is happy to take anything. Just drop the questions there. We'll curate them and make sure we get to them. AI and ML is one of the things we're here to talk about. And how, I'm wondering, Vivek, are you thinking about how providers in pharma are leveraging it to make the systems better?
Yeah, I think it's really really intriguing, and how all the different aspects of the care channels, right? So there are the providers, the pharma, the payers, and even the patients are interacting with AI in their own way to improve their own internal functions, right? So when I look at it, actually the providers are leading the charge. So they are already starting to use ambient AI systems that actually listen to their interactions, and it's one of the fastest growing AI technologies within a healthcare system, which traditionally has been slow at adopting new technologies given the massive amount, but just the improvement in workflows and improvement in the amount of time saved for admin work for providers is driving this. Similarly, for the payer side, the payers are identifying new, more optimized and efficient ways to make decisions. And that, again, comes with its pros and cons and challenges on patient care. And then finally, pharma, right? Pharma throughout the entire drug cycle, from identifying preclinical drug targets to clinical development acceleration, and from a go-to-market strategy in medical and commercial teams utilizing AI for. So all of these, all of these systems are independently working. I think we're going to a path where these systems will start talking to each other eventually and start making decisions, and that's where we will see how patient care evolves into. I don't have a great crystal ball yet on how that will work, but we're starting to see some signs around for example, when you look at patients searching information on ChatGPT, physicians looking for clinical decision support on open evidence type tools, right? And they're already integrating. So how can pharma or any institution be there with the correct accurate information on these tools. So you don't only have to develop materials, not for our providers and patients, but also for AI. And that's the emergence of these generative engine optimizations are emerging as. So these are early signs and signals that these systems are going to start talking to each other. So it's fascinating, and I'm looking forward to what happens in a year or so.
Yeah. Do you see, you've mentioned a couple of different use cases and have hinted at decisioning, but not quite gotten there. And one of the things that I know Eddie pulled out is this tension between who decides. And is that an AI agent, or is that a human or a leader in the loop? And what's the role of the human versus the AI agent in some of these innovations?
At this point, we don't have the regulatory and legal frameworks developed to actually hand off all decision making to an AI. But we're starting to see that early experiments that AI is actually better at making clinical decisions for the patient in a blinded study compared to clinicians plus AI or AI alone. So AI with the right context in certain scenarios is better. So we're going to get to that point, but we'll have a lot of discussions around how to create frameworks to manage risk there.
Yeah, I think that is an important distinction, especially as we start to talk about how we innovate, because that is the very bleeding edge at the most sort of patient focused part of the channel. But yet when we back up from there are ways to use it short of that, where our leaders and practitioners can partner with AI in a way that does that. And I know, Ravi, you've got some experiences from manufacturing that really highlight how AI and ML can be used even when there's things like regulatory hurdles and other things, so that you stay away from those constraints but can still leverage the technology. How have you thought about that, and how do you see that going?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when the whole AI revolution started like a couple of years back, I think the initial conversations were generally towards how we can use AI and ML on patient focusing processes, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I've realized later on was we can also use AI and ML on the non-patient impacting processes, right? As Vivek said, we currently do not have any regulatory frameworks around utilizing AI and ML and within the regulatory manufacturing or these regulatory domains. So the navigating AI and ML in medical and pharma manufacturing is more about embedding regulatory thinking into the innovation process and just overcoming the hurdles. One can do a significant impact, I believe, by focusing on three key areas: process, partnership, and proof. When we start with the non-patient impacting process, like deploying an ML for predictive maintenance on our complex manufacturing lines, whether we do continuous manufacturing or a discrete like batch manufacturing, we can always deploy predictive maintenance utilizing all the data. We can also implement quality and yield optimization using like thousands of sensor data. We all, like any manufacturing facility, has thousands of IoT devices, and these are sometimes necessary by the regulatory frameworks like FDA or EMA. Instead of just showing the data to regulatory bodies and proving that yes, our product is safe, we can also utilize the same data to find optimal parameters and maximize the batch yield and purity, right? That's one way to do it. And regulatory bodies like FDA have recognized, at least in the last few years, the importance of data and digitalization, and have how do I say? Therefore, they're coming up with regulatory frameworks. They're still having those discussions internally, and having these discussions with the many major pharma companies and stakeholders within it. But I think leaders need to engage proactively with the regulatory agencies and demonstrate how the solutions they are building within their each sector is able to ensure data integrity, traceability, and especially when we are integrating, the legacy OT systems to the IT systems, right? This is all part of the Industry 4.0 strategy, and I think all the leaders within each sector, within this huge domain, need to focus on that and collaborate with the regulatory bodies in order to build this wonderful framework.
I like the fact that you focused in on data, and in sort of my role at Hyland, we really think about data and the power that it brings. 80% of the world's data is unstructured. And that's often a problem for non-AI systems as well as AI systems. But data can be really useful if I get back to the way Eddie was talking about how we need to be thinking at a systems level, understanding how often something breaks down, how often do customers fail to implement it in the way we expected. And we have this surplus of data, but a lot of it is unstructured, and it's not easy to get either complete data. Our sort of rough figures say that 60% of the time we don't have complete data on anything, and half the time leaders don't even trust the data that they got. But if we think about the fact that we've got good data in some cases and sketchy data in other places that when combined together can give us a more complete picture. One of the things that I want us to think about is when we're thinking about data quality and hygiene and how sure we have to be of that data before it leads to a clinical decision, very different to it leading to an operational or a process decision or a leadership indicator that takes us to the next decision that we can then make with better data. And the rule somebody gave me recently, which I love to apply when it comes to AI, is that when we're looking for a probable good idea or a probable answer, we can leverage AI because it's a probabilistic tool. When instead we're looking for precision and the decisions are critical, we want to lean into our governance processes, which is more of that leadership process. So the two can come together, but we need to use both to overcome that. When we're thinking about all of this and us as leaders who are trying to innovate, what are you thinking, Vivek? I want to come back to you about in terms of systems level thinking and leveraging AI as part of that. When and how leaders engage in that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think you hit on the nail on the head is around trust. When we are in these regulated environments, to building automations or orchestrations that are trustworthy is the first step for a leader, right? That is sort of where the North Star is, and from that point onwards, I think we are increasingly going to a work paradigm, which is kind of legacy org charts are going to be transformed into work charts. What I mean by that is that there are aspects of the workflow that are going to be human alone. There are aspects where human and AI are collaborating, working together, and then there's an agentic AI that's autonomously doing its job. So this is where, to what Ravi's point and Eddie alluded to, systems thinking, data governance, making sure we have the right tools in place. But the emerging topic that I've become very fascinated with is just evaluations, right? So building evals, that you own your own eval, that you are okay with a certain threshold of risk. Like you talk about, there's a probability involved. As long as humans are at the helm of what the output is, those, I think, creating a really good evaluation system for each of these parts of the workflow is incredibly important. So, but
Yeah.
I think I agree with Vivek, what Vivek was saying, right? The AI model is as good as the data we provide, right? So I think we need to hold hands of AI, at least for many years to come, particularly in the healthcare sector, to help it understand, what are the parameters, how to take a decision, or how to even start thinking about the process, right? And provide us optimal solution or optimal answer. And then at the end, human intervention is absolutely necessary, particularly in this sector. If you talk about retail or some other domains, I think that's fine to use AI to take a complete decision and focus on the next processes. But definitely within the healthcare sector, we definitely need trained professionals to take the last step.
I think that brings us full circle back to Eddie's original example, which is that often when we think about trying to get to the perfect solution, we need a human in the loop, but they need to have a wider judgment, and it can't be just a partial solution. Eddie, you're hinting at sort of this danger of partial solutions or solutions that seem right with that human in the loop. I've got all of the data. I've designed the optimal solution, but somehow the bigger thing doesn't work. But now, instead of having less data and less information to manage to get to the right answer, we've got more. So how do you feel like you are trying to help others navigate this even more complex situation in which we're trying to get to solutions that work in the real world?
Yeah, so for me, one of the areas I'd always try and emphasize is this whole concept of unconscious bias, right? And where we need diversity of thought. And often in pharma and the medical field, we fall into the trap, right, of thinking that facts and data are the one truth. Right, but I always look at, I use this image of two world maps. One is the one I was brought up with in school, with the UK right in the center, and then the other one is one that's used in some Asian country with China in the center. Well, in the first one, America's west. In the second one, America's east. The facts and data haven't changed at all, but the perception, right, and that positioning that we put ourselves in really kind of may drive us down a path where we need to step back and look at the broader picture. There's also, I think, an element of trust in here. I think both Vivek and Ravi have touched on it, and I see it today with things like self-driving cars. Whenever there's an accident or the car does something wrong, it makes headline news. Yet when you look at the data, they're actually much better and safer than human drivers, right? So it's understanding the limitations both of the technology, but I think also of the human, right? And that I think is where that kind of marriage or partnership can really help us take a step forward. Understanding, of course, that in healthcare, of course, the first thing is, first do no harm.
And one of the things you're talking about is how one system or humans and machines may be better, but that's a single level up. One of the things I know that we have all dealt with is the fact that if you're going to innovate, if you're going to step things up, you need to be constantly learning. You need to build a system that not only is better than what it was before, but if you want that sustainable competitive advantage, that sustainable innovation, you have to build learning systems and learning processes. And that can be hard to do. Vivek, from your perspective on AI at scale, how can leaders build literacy and feedback loops that helps improve their systems, especially with this fast-moving technology that we've got in front of us?
Yeah, I think that's probably the single most important piece of any leader in today's environment. They need to focus on, right? So there's several studies now point to that AI literacy, AI fluency in an organization is a signal towards learning and getting the benefits and gains from this really transformative technology. But there was the most recent MIT report suggesting that 95% of the AI pilots and AI programs failed in an organization. And again, there is a lot of limitations to that study, but one thing was very clear. When they tried to build internally without having the right expertise from a change management perspective, having the AI fluency led to negative effects of not being able to realize the gains from these AI tools. So I think it's the priority for every organization right now, and there are so many different models that are emerging. Right, there's an AI champions model. This morning I read an article where they've created an AI orchestrator, where they looked at 600. There's a Norwegian sovereign bank from that 600 of their employees. They got 50 of them to be ambassadors and upskill them, that can then upskill the rest 600. But everyone and the CEO's line, and this kind of stuck with me, that get on the train or be left at the station. I think it's coming from top down focus on AI literacy and fluency in an organization. So that's sort of when my, I agree with that point of view, is that you need to upskill everyone. We're going through a phase change from using typewriters to author a document to a computer, which is much faster, better, cheaper in so many ways, right? So
yeah, I think that's true. And I also think it's true that we need to make sure that we're really cautious about where those trains are going. If the tracks are completed, we certainly don't want to head, and to make sure we get on the right train for the right destination. Different for clinical outcomes than it is for other things. And we have to be smart as we do that. I know our time together is coming to a close, and I want to be conscious of the time. It looks like the few themes that you've brought out is when it comes to AI, especially on leading through it, is that first defining the right problem and think about the impact that it has, and focus on the right problem with the right end impact. Secondly, to think at a system level rather than just at individual components of it, how it gets used in situ. Build learning systems that adapt and improve with AI in the loop instead of on the sidelines or leading it. And then be smart about how and when leaders and humans are in the loop, so that they are ensuring that the right amount of control and agency is present. There are two upcoming panels that will sort of further these discussions. One is next around, we've got a longevity expert panel that also considered AI use when diagnosing certain patient conditions. And then there's another one at 4 p.m. Eastern about layering talent across science and technology, increasingly with healthcare valuing technologists rather than simply medical professionals. So I want to give each of you just a minute to reflect. If you could give the leaders that we're talking to one parting thought about leadership that helps innovation thrive, what would it be? And Eddie, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, for me, it's always to take that holistic and that big picture approach. And to borrow from a transport analogy, you want to be a transportation expert rather than a car mechanic, right? And understand how all those pieces, fit together, and what characteristics of whatever innovation or solution you're developing are actually going to make an impact in that system. And if you look at something like medicines, does a 10% increase in efficacy make a difference? That's the kind of thing that you need to be thinking about, and not just focus on the inherent characteristics of a particular medicine or a process, right? It could be a process that we're talking about.
Yeah. Medicine that stays in the bottle or gets used incorrectly is almost worse than no medicine at all. And so I love the way you think about that whole system.
Absolutely.
Ravi, what about you? If you could impart one thought as we close, what would that be?
I think for leaders, they need to definitely have a bigger picture in mind, and using AI and ML should always be a thought for the future. But at the same time, the world is changing a lot at a pretty rapid speed. So we should start, I think, at least small, right? In the healthcare sector, without any formal frameworks available, to rely on, we should start small, which are not going to affect the product your company is building, and start from there, so that the employees have an understanding on how AI works. Once you train them, they already have a lot of domain knowledge, right? AI doesn't have that. All its AI is getting trained on the information available on the internet, not on they are not the domain experts.
Correct.
Right? So the moment you integrate, you help your employees understand how AI works and how to utilize it, then you're going to be more productive, right? And this is general perspective. In manufacturing, definitely, as I said earlier, predictive maintenance, anomaly detection, whatever it can be, right? And collaborate with the regulatory bodies. I think those areas would be my primary focus for the time being.
And I think what you just described gets back to Chris Argyris's work around learning loops and building in those learning loops with those knowledgeable partners, which I think is a good concept to have and to remember. Right. Vivek, what about you?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think because Eddie and Ravi did a fantastic job. I think those are really good, wise, sage advice for all the leaders. But to just cultivate fearless curiosity, I think that's another concept that is becoming, things are moving so rapidly that I think it's hard to comprehend what will happen next. So we need to continuously learn. And Melissa, you're talking about these continuous learning cycles. Yes. That there has to be dedicated time given for employees to learn these new tools and start incorporating them into and figuring out how they will transform their workflows. So
I love that you brought us back to that fearless curiosity, because that's one of the core concepts of sort of this as well, but of this whole event. But I also think it's really critical for us as leaders to set up that control and agency inside, so that you've got a safe space for that curiosity to be satisfied, where that learning can occur, and making sure the thing that we need to be focusing on, it's safe to experiment, it's safe to learn, and to add those learning loops in. So there was once a research study about a playground with kids. And the thing that they learned is that when the playground itself was not fenced, all of the young students stayed very far away from the edges because there was a road around the edges. But as soon as they put the fences up, it was perceived to be much safer, and they utilized the entire space for play and experiments going on forever. And to make it focused on where the safe spaces are to innovate, to experiment, and make sure we build those learning loops in there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.